Hello and welcome into episode 30 of Preps to Pros. I'm Cooper Petagna alongside Andrew Ivins, and happy Halloween from everybody here at 24/7 Sports. We got a great show for you today. We're going to talk a little bit about Cormani McClain, what he means for Miami. The Canes also add three-star linebacker Caleb Spencer as well. A lot happening in the recruiting world. We'll also get to one of the best individual defensive performances you will ever see from JT Tuimoloau. And then we'll get to week 9 freshman standouts. Nice little segment that we're getting accustomed to, our 2-minute drill. Drew Allar, is it his time in Happy Valley? Also, I'll hit on TCU, their chances for the college football playoff. And Brian Harsin, 9-14 after 2 seasons at Auburn on the Plains. He is done. That news just coming down from SEC country. So, Drew, a lot to get to, my man, but it just seems like it keeps picking up. And these coaches, Drew, like we revisited a month ago, we said it was going to be hard for Brian Harsin to get through October. There's a lot going on, man. So how you doing?
I'm doing good. Yeah, Harsin at the buzzer right there, October 31st. You're kind of wondering, hey, does November change anything? I'm at the gym, and then all of a sudden you see the news come across all the tweets. So just wild time. And look, I call it silly season. I think we saw a little bit of that last week with Cormani McClain's announcement. You think one thing at the last second, something else happens. And I just think that's setting the stage for really a wild 6-7 weeks leading up to that early signing period. I think we're only going to get more of that in terms of just last minute changes, last minute surprises, and I'm here for it. I think it's making recruiting exciting again.
Well, we're going to get to Brian Harsin at the end of the show in the 2-minute drill. So if you're an Auburn fan, stick around for that. But Drew, another name you brought up right there, Cormani McClain, the number 1 defensive prospect in the class of 2023. And last week on this show, on Wednesday, all signs pointed to the Florida Gators landing the commitment of Cormani McClain. Drew, you covered this really from start to finish. Cormani McClain opting to go with the Miami Hurricanes, kind of sending shockwaves throughout college football. What does this mean for Miami? And Drew, if you don't mind pulling back the curtain for us and that 24 hours leading up to his commitment to Miami, you were there, you covered it. What was that like?
Well, let's start with what this means for Miami. I think it just shows that Mario Cristobal is going to get the best talent to Miami. And when he was hired back last December, I said, if you're Nick Saban at Alabama, you need to watch out. If you're Kirby Smart at Georgia, you need to watch out because Mario Cristobal is going to make it hard for some of these kids to leave the state. We'll see what happens with Cormani McClain, but the fact that Mario, who is struggling year 1 on the field, was able to go and get arguably the top cornerback prospect in the country, the top defensive prospect, get him committed, I think says a lot. And you asked me to pull back the curtains on this. I mean, Cooper, we were on the show that Wednesday. I said 28 hours out, I liked I liked Florida heading into that announcement. I mean, all signs are pointing to the Gators, but I think the way I left it, as I said, Mario's not going to go down without swinging, right? He's backed into a corner. I think he's dangerous in this situation. Well, let's get to Thursday. I go to Lakeland High School for that announcement. I'm out at practice, started getting a little bit of a weird vibe. Hey, what's going on here? Make some calls, start hearing some Miami buzz. But you never really know. And that's why I say it makes it like silly season. You don't know what to believe when you get into that fog of the recruiting war. And I pressed some of my contacts an hour before, hey, should we be prepared for a potential surprise? Is Cormani going to pull off a bit of a shocker? And I could never get really much of an answer. Then, when he shows up and he makes that announcement, we have this whole run of a script of schedule. I had gone through with his mother. Cormani's going to sit down at this time. He's going to people are going to talk about him at this time. He's going to announce at this time. Well, Cormani shows up a little bit late. They play a video. He sits down. Next thing you know, he grabs the microphone and puts on a Miami hat and says that he's going to Miami. I've covered hundreds of these. This is for the first time. I thought the kid was joking. I thought he was going to pick the Miami hat and throw it away and eventually grab a Florida hat. But no, sure enough, Miami was the pick. He actually redid the hat ceremony so the CBS Sports HQ cameras could capture that moment. But it was wild. It felt different. And I really don't think the pulse of that recruitment change until right at the buzzer. I think it was Florida out in front, and then Miami slowly with Mario Cristobal, and then, let's be real, NIL's certainly a factor in all this stuff. They sneak in at the last minute. I think they keep it airtight, so no one knows which way the kid's leaning, and it's a huge win for Mario Cristobal.
Silly season in full effect, Drew. You mentioned that. And as we turn the page to November, just a month and a half away from early signing day, December 21st this year, these type of things start to become a little bit more normal. And Cormani McClain, Mario Cristobal, Drew, we've said it on this show multiple times. You have to be wary of Mario Cristobal and the Miami Hurricanes, especially with their late surge. We saw it with Jadyn Rashada. We saw it with Malik Bryant as well. Florida, unfortunately, on the other end of this for the Miami Hurricanes as they surge in the rankings. But, Drew, it wasn't just Cormani McClain. On Friday, the Canes also added 3-star linebacker Caleb Spencer from the state of Virginia. And this was a big get because he was committed to Brent Venables in the Oklahoma Sooners. And this was a guy on the show, Drew, that you've got to see in person. And I believe you compared him to a very promising player in the NFL, but that was Isaiah Simmons. So this is not just something that it should be, headline type of news. So big get for Miami in the Hurricanes. Tell us what you like about Caleb Spencer.
Oh, yeah, I think anytime a kid announces Friday night, it's going to kind of fly under the radar just because of that's the nature of the beast. I mean, how many people are paying attention to recruiting at that hour? But this is a huge get. And I have compared Caleb Spencer to Isaiah Simmons because that's what Brent Venables and the Oklahoma Sooners were telling Caleb he could be. They're telling him he's a guy that can do a little bit of everything on the defensive side of the ball. He's 6'2 and a half, 210 pounds. He plays safety, box safety right now. But they're a guy that they think could grow into a linebacker at the next level. He can rush the quarterback. He can drop back into coverage, one-on-one with a tight end or a wide receiver. I think this is a huge get for Miami because of that versatility. But the biggest thing is he can tackle, right? And if you've watched a Miami Hurricanes game this season, you've watched one at any point over the past 2 years, one of the biggest issues for has been the secondary and that second level defenders getting guys to the ground. So this is a big pickup for Miami. Caleb dealing with an injury right now. I believe it's a shoulder injury. So he's a guy that's going to need to get some things cleaned up once he's on campus. But I think this is a monster statement. I'm not sure Miami's able to do this if it isn't for Oklahoma struggling a little bit here. And yes, I know Miami is struggling, but it seems like, and Cooper, I know you work for Mario, but man, once he gets one commitment, they're fast and they're ready to pounce on the next one. They love to get momentum going. So they get Cormani on Thursday, and I'm sure they pressured and twisted Caleb's arm to get that thing done when they did, and that's why we saw it on Friday night.
He understands the importance of perception better than any other coach that I've been around, Mario Cristobal, but there's definitely a concerted effort on that second level. Malik Bryant was a guy that we mentioned earlier in the show, Popo Aguirre, and then Drew, another guy that we really like, Bobby Washington. So I think Miami obviously pushing their chips to the middle of the table on the second level defenders and a big get in Caleb Spencer. But Andrew, let's look to a week ahead in recruiting, and still some top names planning to come off the board. And let's start with top 247 offensive lineman DJ Chester, who was set to announce on Thursday the number 7 offensive lineman per 24/7 Sports. Right now, LSU holds all of the crystal balls for DJ Chester, but coming off an official visit to Michigan, Ole Miss involved in this one as well. Drew, what are you hearing the latest on DJ Chester?
I think LSU is the team to watch here, and DJ Chester was up in Ann Arbor. Steve Wiltfong, director of recruiting for 24/7 Sports, he had a great write-up from Chester recapping his time in Ann Arbor. I know Ole Miss is in there, but someone's going to be getting a good one on Thursday. When I look at DJ Chester, he's just a big mauler up front. Love the two-way snaps that he is getting, and this is a guy that Gabe Brooks has really championed his rise in our rankings. I remember DJ Chester was a guy that was outside our top 247. He has climbed higher and higher and higher and up. And look at him right now, sitting number 55 in the rankings. I think when I look let's say he goes to LSU, and we know what they're doing with their young offensive linemen right here in 2022. I mean, DJ Chester, you added to the group with Will Campbell, some of those guys they already have committed. I think the future of LSU's offensive line would look so bright with the addition of DJ Chester, because just like with Will Campbell, I think that's a guy that could see the field much sooner rather than later, just based on what he has put on tape over the years.
Yeah, DJ Chester, the teammate of Zachariah Owens, who plays opposite of him, committed to Clemson. And DJ Chester, you turn on the tape of Zachariah Owens and you're like, who's that guy on the other side? But DJ Chester, Drew, you mentioned it. If he is Baton Rouge bound, this is a guy for LSU under Brian Kelly. The biggest change to me that they've made under Brad Davis, the offensive line coach as well, is recruiting the offensive line position. You mentioned the two freshmen anchoring the offensive line for LSU right now, Will Campbell and Emory Jones, two former top 247 standouts. And in this class, you got Zalance Hurd from Neville in Monroe, also in the boat, Tyree Adams from the state of Louisiana in New Orleans from St. Augustine, and Paul Mupinga from Buford as well. So if you add in a guy like DJ Chester, who reminds me of Emory Jones, a guy that can play tackle or guard, you really love the future of this LSU offensive line room. So Brian Kelly putting an emphasis on the offensive line. Those guys already paying dividends in Baton Rouge. But Drew, let's flip to the defensive side, and a guy that's going to have to make a decision tonight and coming into the day at Red All Clemson. Now that Cristobal favoring Ohio State, that is top 247 defensive lineman Kayden McDonald from the state of Georgia. And this is a big man that I like a lot, Drew. But what is the latest you're hearing with Kayden McDonald?
It seems like this recruitment's been one where it's bounced all around the place, and kind of every one of Kayden's finalists at some point over this past week has felt pretty good. And normally when that's the case, it's hard to get a read. I think initially I was hearing Florida and Clemson, and then if you jump on 247sports.com at any point on Monday, you'll see that the crystal has swung heavily in favor of Ohio State and the Buckeyes. I think there's 6 crystal ball picks logged. It's 100% for Ohio State heading into that announcement. I think it's coming 6 p.m. on 11 Alive, which is a local news station there in Atlanta. And we'll see what happens. But I think Ohio State's going to be the pick, just talking with Steve Wiltfong, director of recruiting, all those different guys. And to me, this is a monster addition for Larry Johnson and the Buckeyes. We saw what Ohio State was able to do up front against Penn State with their defensive linemen. Maybe that's playing a little bit of role in this, but Larry Johnson, he's just a relentless recruiter. He's a guy that has made it clear he wants to upgrade that front seven, his defensive line group. And I think Kaden McDonald, this is a kid who had 62 tackles for loss as a junior, 20 sacks. This year as a senior, he's also been playing a little offense. Cooper, I don't know if you've seen it. He's got like 136 rushing yards, 6 TDs on the ground. You got a 300-pounder running the football, but no, he's very athletic, and it's easy to see why all these schools want him.
The big man, the dancing bear, one of my favorite terms in the football school of Hard Knocks right there. But you add a Kayden McDonald to what already Larry Johnson has in that room with a guy like Will Smith Jr., Jason Moore out of DeMatha Catholic in Maryland. So Ohio State getting it done, two of the best position recruiters in all the country right there, Larry Johnson, Brian Hartline on the other side of the ball. Drew, now it's time for the 2024 quarterback dominoes, and we love talking about quarterbacks, but let's start with our guy Jadyn Davis, and a guy that is one of the most highly sought out prospects in all the country, the number 7 player in 2024, according to 247 Sports, the number 2 quarterback, and he's coming off his 4th visit this year to Ann Arbor, watching Michigan beat up on Michigan State. Drew, Cristobal is rolling in for Jadyn Davis, coming from our director of recruiting, Steve Wiltfong. This has to be a pretty big get considering what was on the table, Dante Moore in the state of Michigan in the 2023 cycle. If the Wolverines are able to pull this one off, you got to really like Jim Harbaugh and the prospect of Jadyn Davis together.
Yeah, and I think the story we're seeing the 2024 quarterback dominoes fall, right? They're starting to fall. And Jadyn Davis is a guy who's visited a ton of different schools. He visited Georgia a bunch. He's been at Clemson a bunch. He's been at Tennessee a few different times. And I think he always seems to be ending up back in Ann Arbor. And I think it'd be a big get for Jim Harbaugh, and I think he fits that offense and what they're trying to do. You're not just a game manager. You're a guy that can attack downfield, but at the same time, you take care of the football. I think Jadyn Davis is an excellent fit for that. Let's say he does eventually commit to Michigan. To me, I want to know what happens with Tennessee, what they're trying to do at quarterback, what happens at Clemson. We always talk about how they've stacked some chips with Christopher Bazina, Cade Klubnik. What are they going to do in the 2024 cycle? So I think that's what some of the more interesting parts. What does Jadyn Davis do, and how does that change the dynamic for some of these other schools out here? Because it seems like once one domino falls, guys have to pivot elsewhere, and Jadyn is a big piece out there.
Another one of those dominoes coming all the way out from the West Coast. That is the number 3 quarterback in the land, the number 12 prospect in the top 247 in the class of 2024. But that is Julian Sayin out of San Diego, Carlsbad High School, a guy that's had an excellent year, and another guy that has made his way around the country, but coming off an unofficial visit to Tuscaloosa and the Alabama Crimson Tide as they defeated Mississippi State just a week ago. Cristobal is rolling in on him. Drew, the last time Alabama went out to California to get a signal caller, it worked out pretty well.
It did, obviously. Julian is apparently going to announce here, I think it's Wednesday or Thursday on ESPN, 4:15, it sounds like, Eastern time. Alabama here, I mean, we talked about some of these other dominoes falling. Julian Sayin seems to be the guy that Nick Saban, Bill O'Brien, and the rest of that staff has locked in early on. And I think it'd be a great get. I mean, again, if you teased it, they go out to L.A. to get Bryce Young a few years ago. This is another guy that can make all the throws. So it'll be interesting to see where he ends up later in the week. No reason to question what Steve Wiltfong, Greg Biggins, and those guys have done with the crystal ball. Alabama seems like they're going to be getting some good news here soon. And let's not forget, Alabama has 2 quarterbacks committed in the 2023 cycle. So they got 3 future arms that'll all be locked up, or could potentially be locked up here in the next few days.
The dominoes are falling in 2024 already, so make sure you keep up with 24/7 Sports, your home for everything recruiting. Make sure you subscribe to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel as well. A lot of great content across the 24/7 Sports platform, and make sure you lock in with the Oyster Boys over the next month and a half as recruiting is picking up here before early signing day. But Drew, let's get to it. The one-man wrecking crew, and if you were watching college football on Saturday, you could not take your eyes off of the one-man performance. Ohio State, Penn State, JT Tuimoloau. Wow, the number 2 player in the class of 2021, according to 24/7 Sports, the number 1 defensive lineman. Drew, let me read out this stat line to you. 6 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, a forced fumble, a fumble recovery, a deflection that resulted in an interception, and 2 INTs, one of them being a pick 6 to seal the game. Let me follow this up and say this is the only player in Ohio State history to record 2 INTs, 2 sacks, force a fumble, and recover a fumble in a game. Also, the same individual stat line has been achieved by Ohio State's defense 8 times since 1976. I mean, I can't even begin to process what we've seen. And you see our guy Dave Biddle here talking about what he saw from JT Tuimoloau. Andrew, try to put this into words, what we saw on Saturday, if you can. I know this is a pretty tough task, but I've never seen anything like it.
Oh, it's one of a kind type of performance. And really, I go back to JTT's recruitment, man. This is one that stretched all the way down the distance. I remember when he announced, I was sitting with Brandon Huffman coming off the Elite 11, and like the Elite 11's always in the summer. And this was a kid that his recruitment was still open. And, a guy on the West Coast, I'm all the way in Florida, where practically on other parts of the country, you're like, oh, what's the big deal? Well, I just saw what the big deal was over the weekend. And Cooper, I wanted to ask you, correct me if I'm wrong here, when JTT was going through this whole process, you were on staff at Washington. Wasn't he a big priority for you guys? Any insight into that whole process and how it all went down?
He was the biggest priority for us. Obviously I worked there under Chris Peterson in 18 and 19, and JTT was the guy that we had circled. That was the one guy you had to keep in state, and we knew it was going to be a head-to-head battle with Ohio State. I think after Chris Peterson decided to retire, that's where Washington really started to fade. But I think Ohio State did a really good job. They went in the state of Washington the year before. They went and got G. Scott Jr., who was on Ohio State's roster right now, was a guy highly recruited out of Eastside Catholic, the same school that JTT went to in high school as well. The following year, Larry Johnson, there goes that man again. He ends up going into the state of Washington, getting the number one pass rusher in the country. And then they go into Washington and they get Emeka Egbuka. That is Brian Hartline, the same guy that I mentioned earlier in the show, two of the best position recruiters in the country. So Ohio State having massive success in the state of Washington. Drew, I don't know how different that would have been if Chris Peterson was still at the helm. Maybe a 50-50 shot at best. But to me, Drew, I think both those guys made the right decisions. Both those guys probably going to end up being early day 1, day 2 NFL draft picks.
Yeah, and I'll say this on JTT. I mean, I only had an opportunity to see him once in person, and that was him playing 7-on-7 for FSP. Coop, I'm sure you're very familiar with FSP. He's on the same team as Keely Ringo. They were out there in Tampa at the Adidas National Championship, and this guy is playing tight end. You know, he's 6'3", 250 pounds. He's running around like he's a 180-pound slot receiver making plays, and it was just super impressive. You could see the body coordination, how they're able to change directions and redirect. And, you know, we always talk about, oh, it's 7-on-7, it's shirt and shorts, but just seeing a big body like that move around, that translates to when these guys get to the next level. And, you know, you saw JTT making those interceptions, forcing turnovers. He's a difference maker up front. And when we use the term difference maker, think of that, JTT. So awesome performance for him. And Coop, there was another former top 5 player in the class of 2021 that made a little bit of a splash over the weekend. Leonard Taylor, who's at Miami, he had a monster performance, 6 tackles, 4 for a loss, 1.5 sacks. I know it was ugly for Miami when it comes to the scoreboard and that field goal fest, 14-12 win for them. But Leonard Taylor, he's coming on as of late. I think right now he's the second highest graded out defensive tackle according to Pro Football Focus. This is a guy I loved in high school. And, you know, you start talking with the guys that cover the program. You're like, hey, is he going to pan out? And sure enough, you know, he's coming alive here as of late. So it's cool to see 2 former top 5 prospects coming up big on Saturday.
Class of 2021, Leonard Taylor and JT Tuimoloau. And if you look back at that class, 2021, Quinn Ewers reclassified, and then you got JTT also as well. Leonard Taylor, like you mentioned, some other big names in there, Corey Foreman too. So that 2021 class, you're starting to kind of see the returns already. That's a class that we might take a further look into over the next week or so. And if you'd like to see that, let us know. Make sure you comment on that. But Drew, a segment now we are getting into weekly, and one that I really like a lot, and I got to give major props to my man Chris Hummer, who makes sure I got all the details on this, and this is kind of the guy that I lean on. But our top 9 freshman impact performers, Drew, I'm going to let you start out here.
How about MJ Morris, Thursday night, right? NC State game. You know, they're facing off against Virginia Tech. MJ Morris, a kid who did not start. Remember, Devin O'Leary was the starting quarterback for the Wolfpack. They've been riding with Jack Chambers, a transfer out of Charleston Southern. Well, Chambers is struggling. MJ Morris comes in. He ends up going 20 of 29 for 265 yards and 3 touchdowns in the second largest FBS comeback of the season. They were down 18 in the third quarter. He rallies the troops, and probably the most impressive thing against the blitz, he was 7 of 10 for 65 yards and 2 touchdowns. And MJ Morris, he's a kid I saw at multiple camps. You know, it was a bit of a difficult evaluation. You know, got dinged up, hurt a little early in the process, but he put together a big senior season at Carrollton High there in Georgia. He was a candidate for Mr. Georgia football in the state. You know, he's someone that finished number 24 in our rankings as a quarterback, and it seems like NC State has the arm of the future. They can build around this guy. I would expect him to be the starter moving forward. So we'll see if that high 3-star grade proves to be a little bit wrong here. Maybe he's someone that should have a 4-star next to his name, but I thought that was an awesome performance, and one I wasn't even anticipating. I tuned it in. I thought it was going to be Chambers. Next thing you know, MJ Morris is in down the stretch, and that's an awesome win for NC State.
I like this segment, Drew, because we get to go back and we kind of get to dissect each other's evaluations in a little bit. Nobody has made me eat my words more than running back Quinshon Judkins. And this guy is one of the baddest guys in all of college football. Big week for him, the number 53 running back coming out of Montgomery last year in the state of Alabama. 34 touches, 205 yards, and a touchdown in College Station as Ole Miss gets a big win against Texas A&M. Over 1,000 yards rushing on the season, 13 touchdowns. He is averaging 10.1 yards per carry this season. He has been absolutely awesome and has been a game changer for Ole Miss. I went on this show a couple weeks ago. I apologize. I don't know if I can apologize anymore, but we love Quinshon Judkins. Happy to see him having success. But Drew, another guy, this is the guy that I would say we got right. And thank goodness for that exposure in San Antonio at the All-American game. But that is Georgia defensive lineman Mykel Williams, a former 5-star at 24/7 Sports.
Yeah, he picked up his second sack of his freshman season over the weekend at the cocktail party there in Jacksonville against Florida for Georgia. You know, he finished up the game with 3 pressures. He's now got 14 pressures on the season. And remember, I think earlier on in this show at the initial stages when we talked about impact freshmen, Mykel Williams is a name, Cooper, that me and you kept bringing up because we kept hearing from people in Athens that this is going to be the guy. And I'm not surprised that he's now just starting to find his groove as a pass rusher. You know, I think it takes some time, especially at these big programs like Georgia, where there's so much talent, to get adjusted. The path to the field is a little bit harder to find. So I think Mykel Williams, my big takeaway here, we saw what he did against Florida. I think he's just going to make more plays down the stretch. And, man, by the time he's a sophomore next season, he can be an impact player for the Bulldogs. So I thought it was encouraging to see that performance. Again, 3 pressures, 1 sack for Mykel Williams. I think we absolutely nailed that ranking, and obviously there's still a ways to go. But it was good to see Mykel having an impact for Georgia.
Nice to have a guy like that in the chamber for Kirby Smart. Drew, I'm going to go back to the quarterback position and a guy that really turned a lot of heads on Saturday night. That is Conner Weigman of Texas A&M. 28 of 44, 28 of 44, 338 yards, 4 touchdowns, and a 28-31 loss to Ole Miss. But you have to look at that performance as a whole. Weigman really battled throughout the night. A&M's offense, statistical production as where it's been in the past under Haynes King and Max Johnson, a lot more improved. Those were a lot of the question marks that Jimbo Fisher has had throughout the season. So I think when you look at this, Conner Weigman, obviously a highly touted player coming out of the state of Texas, a number 22 player per 24/7 Sports, and last year cycled the number 2 quarterback, only behind Cade Klubnik. So this is a very welcoming sign for Jimbo Fisher, and a year where you're 3-5 and you're looking for something to build on. I think this performance is definitely something that gives you a lot of hope and a guy that you can build around in the future as the Aggies try to get it right, Drew. But your last one here, Drew, you're going to the HBCU, and that is Jadyn James.
Yeah, Edgerrin James' son. This is a guy I had a chance to cover one of his games last season when he was a senior down in Florida. Treasure Coast High School beat American Heritage Plantation, and Jadyn James in that upset was the big difference. Why? He ran for close to 300 yards. Well, you know, I was wondering how would he do at the HBCU ranks. We gave him essentially a Power 5 grade, and he goes for 114 yards over the weekend as Howard University beats Norfolk State. You know, we talk so much about HBCUs and Travis Hunter, Kevin Coleman, all those guys at Jackson State. But, man, there's a guy that I don't think enough people are talking about, and that is Jadyn James. And, you know, he could have went to Indiana. Miami was involved at one point, a ton of different group of 5 schools, but he decided to blaze his own path and go to Howard University. First 100-yard game for him of his young career. I would expect more from him there at Howard. I think he had a 66-yard run in it. So cool to see Jadyn James, whose brother is a big-time basketball recruit and just recently committed to Georgia. Cool to see him getting it done, especially with his dad being the NFL legend that he was.
Big week for the HBCUs this past weekend as College Game Day went down at Jackson State as Jackson State beat Southern to remain undefeated on the season. But Drew, my last one here, we're going to go to the Pac-12 footprint, and that is former top 247 standout edge rusher David Bailey. Played well against UCLA in a 13-38 loss in LA. 9 tackles, 1 sack, a forced fumble, and 5 pressures. And Drew, this is kind of a really good example of a guy that I don't want to say we struggled to pin, but there was a range on the player, which I mean, there were some people that were very convicted on him being a top 32 talent. I think his floor was a guy that we saw in the top 40, but a very good player coming out of modern day, very high ceiling, had some production. So this is a guy coming along early for Stanford. Good to see him playing well. So there you have it, the top impact freshman of week 9 in college football per the Oyster Boys, Cooper Petagna and Andrew Ivins. But Drew, now it's time for our 2-minute drill. And I know this is one that's really coming from producer Jesse as he hides behind the curtains. But producer Jesse wants to know about Drew Allar, and when are we going to see the Drew Allar experience as Sean Clifford in Penn State fall to another top-ranked opponent in Ohio State? Hard-fought game this weekend in Happy Valley. But Drew, now it poses the question, with Penn State sitting at 6-2 and really considerably more than likely out of the Big Ten title race, is it now time to go to the former number 1 quarterback prospect in last year's class in Drew Allar?
Well, I think it is. And I think producer Jesse brought up a great point in our pre-production show meeting. You know, I think if Drew Allar gets on the field and people can see what he can do with the football in his hands, that's going to allow or should I say, make Penn State maybe a little bit more attractive to some of the receivers or the tight ends in the transfer portal. And, you know, I think if you're not going to win a Big Ten title, right, I think if you're a Penn State fan, you know, the difference between a 9-3 season, an 8-4 season, and a win or a loss, like it's not much. Like, I think we've gotten to the point where if you're Penn State, you need to turn the page on Sean Clifford. He has done so much for the program, but let's not forget, Sean Clifford is also the same age as Mac Jones, who's in year 2 of the NFL, Tua Tagovailoa, who's year 2 of the NFL. Like, I remember all those guys being at the same camps together. So at some point, start thinking towards the future. And I think for Penn State, that would be to get Drew Allar some live reps and start preparing for the class or for 2023. So I'm all for getting Drew Allar out there. I think it allows, again, for everyone in that locker room, you know, the recruit situation, the transfer portal situation, everyone to get a sense of what they have here over the next 5 weeks or so, and then go from there.
Well, you mentioned the locker room, Drew, and listen, I think the logic makes a lot of sense between you and producer Jesse in terms of what you want to see. And with my past experience on the personnel side, there were some situations where we saw this, where there was a young up-and-coming prospect that we really liked, and basically the end goal for the season was not attainable anymore. But I think what comes into play is, and we've seen this from James Franklin earlier in the season, a reluctancy to make that move to Drew Allar because of the type of confidence that he has in the player and the loyalty that he has to the player. And how does that impact the locker room from a psychological standpoint? So I think Sean Clifford will get the benefit of the doubt here. Now, in terms of building for the future, I think it makes sense. And it just depends on how you run your business. How does James Franklin see this from 30,000 feet? And what is the value of a decision like this and the risk versus reward? So we'll see that for Penn State. They end the season on the road at Indiana, as you see right there. Also Maryland as well, and a couple more Big Ten games on the schedule. Drew, my 2-minute drill, I'm going to go to the Big 12. I'm going to talk about TCU, a team that is undefeated right now, the number 17 in the AP poll, and a team that is playing well. They have the second most AP top 25 wins of any team in the college football playoff right now. And when I say that, within the top 7 programs. So only behind Tennessee, who has 5 wins against AP top 25 opponents. I look at TCU, and if you look at their final stretch here, they go Texas Tech at home, at Texas in Austin, then at Baylor, and then they finish with a Matt Campbell team that is struggling with Iowa State at home. If they run the table, is that enough to put them over the top? And you start looking at it, Michigan, Ohio State, a one-loss team, their resume, is that going to be enough to put them in over an undefeated TCU? Alabama with their one loss right now at Tennessee, the number 2 ranked team in the country, down in the wire. There's a lot of different scenarios in Alabama. 2 opponents that are ranked in the top 15 with LSU and Ole Miss on the road. If they win those games going away impressively, I think we've known from past experience what voters really kind of think there. They're probably going to favor a team like Alabama over a team like TCU. So we'll see what happens with TCU nonetheless, those guys are doing a great job. They pick up a commitment from 4-star safety today, Warren Roberson. And Drew, we kind of talked about TCU in the beginning of the year before they were 8-0, before they went on this run, what they needed to do to get back into recruiting. Those are the type of recruitments that they need to win. So excellent job by Sonny Dykes, his staff, getting TCU back in the big picture on the national stage. But Drew, we're going to wrap this show up with the news that broke a little bit earlier in the day before we came on the show, and that is Brian Harsin out at Auburn on the Plains, 9-14, 4-9 in the SEC. Drew, I want to get your quick thoughts on this, on that hire itself, maybe where Auburn goes from here, and I'll let you take it away.
To me, I look at Auburn's roster, and obviously we don't know what's going to happen with the transfer portal, and we saw a bunch of guys in or out last week. But when I look at that two deep, I don't think this is a massive rebuild or something that's going to need a ton of time to get the roster right. I think that's important to think about here. I think if you get the right guy in, we've seen it this season. Auburn still is attracting a ton of top talent. There's a number of high-profile recruits that have continued to visit Auburn. So I think whoever is the next hire there just needs to embrace the idea of recruiting in the SEC. And we knew Brian Harsin wasn't exactly the right fit from the jump. But I think, just get the right guy in there, a guy that is not afraid to be in some of these recruiting battles, and more importantly, a guy that can win some of these recruiting battles and is going to go the extra distance. We've talked about the current NIL landscape. I think Auburn has its ducks in a row. When I was there for the Penn State game, I mean, they had a whole commercial on the big screen in between plays about their NIL collective and all that type of stuff. So they have the right idea. They're building a brand new facility there, a football-only facility. It looks awesome. So to me, I don't think this is something where, you've got to think about a program rebuilder. I think if you get the right guy in there, Auburn can be competitive again very early in that SEC West. So I don't know what direction that is, Cooper. I know you're going to throw some names at us. You said them before we got on here. I think that they're all certainly intriguing. But to me, I think get a winner in there and you can win early at Auburn.
Well, I think alignment is the key when you look at Auburn. Auburn is so frustrating to me from a program standpoint, and new AD John Cohen coming over from Mississippi State wastes no time, makes this decision, which I think is him trying to say, listen, I'm the one running the show, and that's exactly what Auburn needs. There's been a lot of questions around the program. Who is the person or persons making the decision for the Auburn football program? Now that you have that person in place, it's time to make a grown-up decision. You brought a guy here from Boise State in the Mountain West Conference who had never recruited a recruiting class higher ranked than number 57, and then you drop him into the gauntlet, which is the SEC West. Right now, I think Auburn needs a proven winner. The name obviously floated around as the number one choice has been Lane Kiffin with Ole Miss, but I think there's some guys out there that make sense. Mark Stoops, certainly a candidate at Kentucky, the job that he's done. You'll hear names like Luke Fickell, Matt Rule, Deion Sanders, who is probably more of an upside play, but there's going to be some interest out there. Hugh Freeze at Liberty as well. I floated the name Dan Lanning. He's got a $14 million buyout. I don't think that's going to be an option for Auburn, but Auburn should really be in a very good position to hire somebody that can come in here and reestablish credibility to a once proud program. They need an adult here, and they need alignment more than anything. And I think that's what we've seen. And also, you have to be able to recruit. You have to know your personnel. Part of these hires is knowing the people that you're going to compete against. You're going to compete against Alabama in your own state. You're also going to compete against Georgia, Clemson, Florida as well, who's had success in the state of Alabama. You look at some of these new coaches from this past year, Drew, you got Marcus Freeman at number 3 in the country, Brent Venables at number 6, Brian Kelly at number 7, Mario Cristobal at number 8, Florida, Billy Napier at number 9. The list goes on and on. Dan Lanning and Lincoln Riley inside the top 15. Auburn can recruit, and that has been without a guy steering a ship where everybody knew he was a dead man, and they're still getting guys to campus. So if you're Auburn, if you're the decision maker, if you're John Cohen, you really got to take your time and you got to get this right. and carry it with your chest and don't make a lazy hire, which is what they did last time. And that was just one of the all-time bad fits, bad hires. It was bad for Brian Harsin. It was bad for Auburn football. They don't deserve that. So hopefully they have a grown-up in the AD chair that's going to make this decision, and hopefully they can bring an adult in that knows what winning football games in the SEC is supposed to look like. So on that, Drew, any final thoughts? Do you have one name that I brought up or didn't bring up that maybe is kind of on the back of your mind for this job?
Well, I got a lot of friends that are tied into the Auburn program, and you mentioned it. One name that I think certainly we'll hear a lot about, Lane Kiffin. Why not him, man? I mean, you put him in the same state with Nick Saban. I think Lane would be the perfect fit for Auburn in terms of getting a guy that's going to adapt his offense to the personnel around him, a guy that's going to embrace the transfer portal. I'm all for Nick Saban and Lane Kiffin having to go at it every year in one of the biggest rivalries in all of college football. So to me, he's one that you got to make the phone call, just gauge where he's at. Remember, we used to do the first calls. I think Lane's certainly one that deserves that.
Yeah, I think this pursuit is going to be real. Don't forget who his agent is. That is Jimmy Sexton, and that's the big boy. That's who you want on your side. So Lane Kiffin, whether he stays at Ole Miss or whether he goes to Auburn, he's going to be making a lot of money. But for Andrew Ivins, I am Cooper Petagna, and as always, make sure you tune in to the 24/7 Sports YouTube platform. We will be back on Wednesdays. The Oyster Boys getting ready to name a team of the week, and I think, Drew, we have it already. The Ohio State Buckeyes, big win over Penn State. We will go over their recruiting class from top to bottom. A lot to talk about there, a loaded class for Ryan Day and company. But until then, we'll see you next time.